Are you a leader, manager, entrepreneur, business owner, or knowledge worker? Are you leading people or wondering how to be a better leader in your own life and work? If you are, then you can be experimenting better. Welcome to The Experimental Leader, a podcast that takes a look at the ways leaders are experimenting in their own work. Hosted by Melanie Parrish, we dive into real-life conversations about how people might be using a scientist's mindset and experimenting in their work. Shift your leadership into something that works better. Join us on The Experimental Leader today.
Hey, it's so great to be here with you live today. I've been thinking about leadership a lot, and I've been thinking about how hierarchies work, sort of top-down hierarchies in organizations. And I had this really interesting realization that top-down hierarchies sort of remove some of the needs that we have in organizations for emotional intelligence because the hierarchy is really clear. So you don't need to know how people are feeling. But the skills of emotional intelligence are really powerful in any type of organization. But as we flatten our organizations and those hierarchies are less clear and we need more collaboration, we sort of need more talking. We need feedback loops. And so the hierarchies get in the way of those feedback loops. The flatter the organization, the more people feel free to speak, the closer it takes the team to innovation. I've been fascinated with this as I think about my own organization, as I look at the organizations of my clients. And I really encourage you to think about what the skills are that you can develop that will really help you create an innovative climate that will contribute to conversation and relationship. And today I'm super excited to have on my show Jeanne Michaels, Dr. Jeanne Michele. And she's many things. She's a teacher, she's a modern day philosopher, she's part change agent, part coach. And she designs and delivers personalized programs to men, women, and couples to help them create lives, relationships, and business partnerships that thrive. I just am really excited to welcome Dr. Michele on the Experimental Leader podcast.
Hi, Melanie. I am so excited to be here. And I love what you're sharing, what you began with regarding leadership and hierarchy and the way things are shifting to make it, there is more of a flat leadership. And I think that that applies to home situations as well as situations in the business.
Oh, can you say more about that? I think that's really interesting.
Absolutely.
How do you think that applies at home?
I think that we are all leaders. So I view it this way. It's like sometimes we are in a position where I have a knowledge and an expertise that causes me to take the lead in something. And sometimes our partner or someone in a business organization has another skill set that causes them to be better at that particular thing. And I think as we've all learned in leadership that the best leaders are the ones who surround themselves with people who have expertise in a lot of different areas. So in the home environment, I think it's creating an atmosphere where everyone gets to contribute. The kids get to contribute, like for example, every week someone picks an activity to do and they get to take the lead in that. And that is teaching leadership skills at a very early level. And we try, I think, as parents, as hard as we can, not to make them right or wrong, but to really help them open up and help them open up a dialogue and conversation, which I think feeds in with the idea of, a shared leadership. So that's my thought on.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it also brings to mind, and I talk about this when I work with teams, but the idea of role nausea. Mm-hmm. So we lead certain things in our personal lives. For years at my house, I was the cook. Mm-hmm. And then I had to have knee replacements quite a few years ago now, mm-hmm. and I stopped cooking. And and I never picked it up again. Like I
Mhm.
cook every now and then, but I'm not the primary
Mhm.
on cooking anymore. My husband had never really cooked, and now he does a lot more of the cooking. And
Mhm.
it's just interesting how you can also shift roles. Like you don't have to inhabit them for your entire relationship. You can also, step out of them or
Mhm.
express that you have role nausea, and how can the system hold those roles more collaboratively.
And you know what I love? It's almost like you just stated a family example of the difference between the hierarchy and something being shared.
That's
In the
right.
hierarchy, you were the cook and that was it. And that was that was your role. And then all of a sudden something happened and it opened up an opportunity for someone else to step in and experiment. And then you found you didn't have to take on that role. So I've never heard of role nausea, but I understand
I
what
love
that
I
means.
love that phrase. Well, and I think that when we consider ourselves stuck in a role, I think I
Mhm.
come from a long line of kitchen martyrs,
Mhm.
and I was so happy to give that up. Like
Mhm.
my grandmother would never let anyone in her kitchen, and
Mhm.
my mom really was. I think my mom, when my dad retired, she said, either you can learn to cook or we can eat out a lot. And he said,
Uh-huh.
good with going out. So they just did that. Like they designed their relationship.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm really curious. We're talking about thriving today, and I'd
Mhm.
love for you to give just a few tips for people in their relationships, both at home and at work.
Mhm.
Like, what are some of the things you look for to help people thrive?
Well, when I think about the word thrival, I actually love defining words. So I always start out with what's in the dictionary. And when I looked up what was in the dictionary, thriving was success and prosperity, being a highly successful person. And I'm like, well, that may be part of thriving. And that, particularly in the Western world, seems to be how we define things. But when I dug in a little deeper,
Hmm.
I came up with some other definitions beyond survival: growth, positivity, flourishing. And I think about thrival to me is that flourishing, being in the place where something really lights up your world,
Hmm.
where you open into, and part of it's an experiment. This, you have this idea and there's something that you think you'd like to do, and then you kind of lean into it. And I think that it either opens up for you or it kind of doesn't. So then you get to decide, do I push into it? But how does it make me feel? Do I come alive in that? And I think that goes for relationships too. Is there an aliveness that's being created in this relationship? And if not, how can we enter into that? And I think a big key is curiosity. If I'm in a partnership
Yeah.
and you're doing something, like you're doing something in your leadership role, and you come home and you start sharing it with me, I ask questions and I'm curious. And that builds the thrival within the context of the relationship. Does that
Hmm.
make sense? I think that.
Yeah, and there's lots of things that pop into my head as you're talking. One is, when I'm doing client work, often we talk about flow,
Hmm.
but also sort of fulfillment. And I
Hmm.
do think it being a detective
Hmm.
is a really important part of that process, because I think we've all thought, oh, this hobby really sounds fun. And then we try it and we're like, yeah, that didn't
Hmm.
scrapbooking was not my jam.
Hmm.
And so I think, and we have shoulds, like we have
Hmm.
these places that we think about, what our parents did. I had this thought this morning. I was like, one of the places that we've been doing a grand experiment in our families
Hmm.
in the last year and a half is, how do we wash our masks? So like
Ooh, I like that.
so it's like every other thing that I do in my house, I had a role model. My
Uh-huh.
parents did it one way, but this mask thing, like I have teenagers, and I realized we've created a new norm where everybody handles their own mask.
Hmm.
And so we don't share masks, they're not communal in any way. But if we had little kids, we might have handled that differently.
Hmm.
And so I just think I just realized it was a really cool thing that is emerging. This new norm of how we do that is sort of fascinating, and everybody will have their own answer to this. My husband also took to carrying a box of disposable masks in the back of his car because we have one kid who just never can get to the car with a mask.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just solve it. But it's this whole new thing that's a part of daily life that's never been a part of daily life before.
I have to share something very funny that when you first said, "Oh, we talked about washing our masks," I didn't even go with the face masks. Maybe I'm getting used to COVID. I don't know. Wearing them. I went to, how do we wash the masks that we wear?
Oh, interesting. You went all metaphoric.
I totally went to that
literal.
place. And you know what? And I was thinking about it. I think, oh, wow, how cool is that you at your home talk about how do we wash our masks? But and there is some truth in that too. How do we wash off the personas that we carry? You know?
How do
Like,
we
oh,
put down the role?
yes,
that
yes. And
we
how
are
do we
at
not, and
work?
especially when we're doing stuff online, who do I want to be? How do I want to carry myself? How do I look? It's like, Gabor Mate, who is this brilliant medical doctor who was in the field for 20 years and then started working with trauma and people with addiction. He talks about two things that we need, and I think they tie into thrival, two human needs. One is attachment, to attach to someone that we really can love and be loved by, which I think we've all heard of attachment theory and how important that is. But the second thing he talks about is authenticity. I love that, because in order to thrive as a human being, part of it is you need to feel that you're bringing, I think thrival is bringing your authentic self to the table. With everything going on in the world today, I think there's no longer an option to just be silent and, walk away or turn our backs. I think silence is akin to not being in thrival, keeping that voice inside. And how do we do it in a way that creates connection as opposed to making someone wrong? Oh, you're bad, I'm good, you're this, you're that. We have had so much of that, particularly in the United States. And, how do we come to a new place? And Melanie, one of the things that I would argue is that, and I think this applies to all types of leadership as well as in the family and in couples, is we are entering an age of partnership. It kind of goes with what you're saying about hierarchy. We used to be a matriarchal society, which meant, people in feminine form tended to rule. Then we are still more of a patriarchy. But I think with everything going on, that is dropping away. And we are entering an age of true partnership. Like if I'm partnering with you, we're collaborating. And like, just like the mask thing, you say something and it sparks an idea in me, and I spark an idea in you. And I think that creates what I would call co-thrival. We're thriving together. And I think that a big piece of it is being willing to experiment with it. Some things are going to work and some things aren't. And that's okay. And so I think as you let go, maybe clearing your mask, to me, and I do this a lot in the couples work and with individuals, is like, how do you let go of those things in the past that are in your backpack, these rocks that sometimes you don't even know are there, that show up in the present moment when something triggers you?
And what do you tell people when they pull stuff out of their backpack, or they have a hard time putting things down?
Well, I think the first thing is to identify that. Okay, this little thing is triggering you so much. Let's trace it back. And then so often when you come to this place of, oh my gosh, I realized that, my mom, and sometimes it's not that there's been this tremendous trauma and abuse, but there's been these ways in which you didn't feel attached and have your needs met. We unlock it. And we look at, wow. And sometimes there's tears, even for guys, there's this realization, and there's some, like, wow, that came from that. So now how do I show up in this current moment, to answer your question? When, something happens and I get triggered, I think each partner becomes more mindful of that. Like if I know this is your trigger, I'm going to say, ooh, hey, I'm seeing that thing again. Let's stop and pause for a moment. Let's talk about it.
Or don't talk about it. I mean, that's the other option, is you recognize it and you don't keep stepping on it.
I think it's both. Both are really important. Yeah. You don't want to become a victim to it, where every time this comes up, oh, remember when you were 4 years old and all right. But I think you do need to unlock it and to feel
Yes.
the sadness and the loss of it. And then you need to choose in each and every moment your response. And when you realize you're responsible for choosing your response, and you start to, create new, you lay down new tracks in your brain, because the tracks, the well-worn tracks, it's easy to fall into those things, but then you start doing it differently. And I think that also helps to wash away what was there in the past, but it's a choice. And when partners can remind each other of that, it helps build these new neuronal connections in your brain and lay down new ways of being and doing, which allow you to breathe and allow you to have more room to thrive. Because if you've got all that junk in there, it's really hard to thrive because it keeps pulling you back.
Well, and I do this with disc profiling.
Oh, I
So
love disc.
I
Love
love
disc. I
disc
used to
too.
teach it.
I love disc too. And I remember the first time I got my disc profile, I felt like I had like my inner critic parent, critical parent
Mhm,
there in the profile, just telling me everything that was wrong with me.
mhm,
And then over time, I was able to realize where my strengths were and start to live with those and just not to worry so much.
mhm,
I have
mhm,
a really low C, or low compliance
mhm, mhm,
score, which
mhm.
means now I have two assistants. It's no longer a problem. It solves almost everything sort of detail oriented, that my organization handles it, and I
Mhm,
get to go off and be creative and
mhm.
create content and do all the things, do delivery, all the things I'm really pretty good at.
I love that, because I love disc too. And we need to surround ourselves with people that, again, fill in those gaps. I've recently hired a social media person and a VA. I've done it all myself. I've been the same way. And I'm like, I cannot rise to whatever's next for me. And it's not about hierarchical, but open into, let's say it that way. I love what Brene Brown says about living wholeheartedly. I can't
Yeah.
open into that when I'm stuck doing these details that, yeah, I can get them done, but they take a lot out of me. So I did the same thing too. And I love DISC because you can look at what your tendencies are and what your tendencies are under pressure. And how do you round it out? What do it sounds like you're a visionary and you like to experiment. You can't
Oh, yeah,
experiment when you're
of
sitting
course,
there doing all the detail,
of
because you get
course.
stuck in that way of doing things.
I have a crazy question for
Go
you,
ahead,
Jeannie.
go for it.
If you could wave a magic wand and there was one relationship skill that you could just bestow on the world, what would it be?
Ooh, I have to choose one. The first thing I go to is, I can't go to one. I've got to go to two.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
the two is, one is deep listening. So
Mm,
I show up for you in a way where I really listen without trying to decide what I'm going to say next. And I'm really present and curious. I'm just with you. So maybe being with is the thing, but then I'm going to go to the other one. The other one is authentically speaking your truth. And like you said, choosing,
so
you can
sort of
choose not to.
both ways of a conversation.
Yes, yes, it
Yeah.
really is. Those are the biggest things people struggle with, because we listen with the ear of, what we've grown up with. And when I can show up like we are right now, and I'm curious about what you're talking about, and I also want to authentically be me. And I think those are if I could bestow something on the world, it would be that, whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, whether you're a leader, whatever you're doing, because I think that's, and to know. I've got another one, that the wisdom lives inside of you. We really have wisdom inside. And I believe that's our sacred through line. To me, like, spirituality is internal. And I believe there's something greater. And I think it's getting in touch with that and really allowing that and surrendering into that and letting that guide you, not trying to control so hard. So I know I said more than one. I probably said about three or
I
four.
love that you snuck a few extra in, because I do think that maybe sneaking a few extra in is the skill itself, is just
Oh, I like that. Being present in the moment and being fluid.
mm,
Life
yeah,
isn't static.
yeah.
It's being able to be responsive and being in the moment. I think that's it. And enjoying it. Like right now, right here, right now, we're together and it's fun. We're kind of not knowing exactly where the conversation's going to go. We're flowing with one another.
Well, where can people find you, Jeannie?
My website is Living and Loving Courageously. And, one of the things I love is people having courageous conversations. So that's livingandlovingcourageously.com. They can find me there. They can email me there. And I would, love to connect with anybody that has any questions or wants to, start a dialogue.
That's amazing. It's been it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. I loved hearing about how you can deepen relationships. Thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome, Melanie. It was fun, and it was fun connecting with you. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, it was so great connecting with Dr. Jeanne Michele. I loved how it really comes down to deep listening and then authentically speaking. I think when I think about the experimental leader and feedback loops, those are the heart of good feedback loops, both in your personal life and your work life and leadership. It's really the way that information flows. So I really challenge you to think about your listening this week. And I challenge you to authentically speak when you are speaking. It's been great being here with you today. Go experiment.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Experimental Leader. We hope you have found value in today's episode because we're dedicated to helping you become the experimental leader you want to be. To access the show notes or learn more about working with Melanie, visit melanieparish.com. Go experiment.